Hello and welcome to Digging with Dugan. Welcome back to our Rome series. We're going to pick up with Romulus, the very first king, he who the city is named after, supposedly son of a Trojan. Depending on what period in Roman history we are, the legend changes. Anyways, he's a very proper dingleberry, not a very nice guy. He does lots of warrior rude things and makes lots of enemies. He does establish the Senate, though. Establishes that there's 100 people within it, but the Senate initially only acts as a body of advisors. They don't really have any power initially. They just advise and back up whatever the king does. So Romulus makes the Senate, pisses the Senate off, and functionally is murdered by the Senate. He disappears. No one ever sees him again. No one knows exactly when he dies. There's a legend that says that a big storm swept over him and he disappeared in a flash. But he was basically murdered and chopped up because no one likes him. They threw him in a dumpster somewhere. Fuck you, Romulus. You founded the city, but you were a proper brother-murdering asshole. So good riddance to Romulus. Now, here is our last mention of the Sabines. We heard them last time. They were, their daughters and wives had been stolen, and now they're part of Rome. They're integrated, and they are a strange democratic sort of process split between the Sabines and the Romans to elect the next king, who's supposed to be a Sabine. So this sort of reveals a bit of our pseudo-history here. None of this is probably real, except probably the Romulus murdering part. The next guy, his name is Numa Pompilius. I'm not sure if it's related to the Pompeii thing or anything. But he's supposed to be a Sabine. In reality, he's almost certainly an Etruscan from the north. The Etruscans factually conquered Rome at some point. So most of these kings are probably Etruscan kings. We know for a fact the last one's an Etruscan, but the Romans have a big pride, and they have a hard time admitting having ever been beaten at any point, so they will cover things up. Might be true that they were never truly conquered by the Etruscans. I don't really believe it, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because we can't really say for certain. Everything up until the Gauls showing up in Rome will be partially fictitious because a sack destroys most of the hard records. Anyways, onward. An election. Fictitious election, gets Numa elected, and Numa is quite honestly the opposite of Romulus. He is a very peaceful man, a very fair man, a very devout man. He loves the gods. He founds all sorts of religious stuff. If it's religious and it happened at the beginning of Rome, Numa probably did it. The Temple of Jupiter, the Vestal Virgins. The Vestal Virgins are much like nuns, except for I don't know if it's for what's his name? Not Zeus. Zeus is Greek. I forget. Not Mars. That's God of War. I forget the Roman. Anyways, is it Jupiter? I know. We'll move on. So Numa, very religious guy. There's also this religious establishment of the gates of war. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase let fly the gates of war. The Romans had an actual, like a little temple with doors that they opened and closed whenever they were at or not at war. And Numa is contributed as the first and one of the only people to have the doors closed for the majority of his reign. And so Numa has a very long reign. He's contributed with, I think it's like 36 years. And I don't remember how he dies. But the next king is supposed to be a warrior. The next king is a priest who is forced to be a warrior. So we start with a warrior who's not much of a priest, and a priest who's not much of a warrior, and we move on to a guy who wants to be religious but is forced to not be religious. I'm going through this mainly to understand the Roman psyche, because fictitious. There's 7 kings, not 5. I was wrong, though most of them don't matter. Now we're going to quickly skip towards the end, because again, very fictitious. We're only going to cover the important parts, and honestly, there's not that much on the kings before. Also note that these lines of kings do not at all really seem to be a father-to-son thing. Most of them die or don't have a son, or their son-in-law kills them. The second to last king gets killed by his son-in-law. That's Tarquin. He's known as Tarquin the Proud. I've heard either he or his son is the one who's guilty of the final insult to the Roman people, which is the rape of a Roman noblewoman. And when she tells her family, who are most of which are in the military, she kills herself out of shame with a dagger, stabs her right through her heart, supposedly. And this pisses off the public to no end. They rise up and overthrow Tarquin, and they toss him out, and he'll try to come back to take the city back a couple times, I think, but he never does. And so ends the Roman monarchy. It was a guy named Brutus who kills... Oh no, I think he gets murdered, because Brutus is known for killing the last king, so I guess he dies at the hands of Brutus. That'll... write that one down if you're studying, because the name Brutus will come up later. Brutus killed the last king of Rome, and after that the Romans swore off ever having kings. They passed a law that said that you could kill any man trying to make himself king without repercussions. You just had to have the benefit of a doubt that he honestly was trying to make himself king, and you just... dead, done, legal, all good. Romans hated kings. The most, from that point forward, the most fantastic thing you could ever do was kill the enemy king, or have him captured and towed him along in a triumph. That was the other best thing. Triumph is the origin of a parade, but I imagine we'll get to a triumph later. Oh, I should mention, I think it was the second or the first king. One of the kings starts the concept of the triumph. Triumph is where you throw a military parade. It's the only time when a general is allowed in the city of Rome as a general and with his weapons and army. He rides in on a chariot pulled by 4 white horses, which is back to the honors of the Roman king. Though, mind you, while they're doing this, there's a slave whose job it is to sit next to you and whisper in your ear to tell you, remember that you are immortal. Because, they don't want their generals going off and trying to declare themselves kings or anything. But, the triumph is one of the most interesting and archaic parts of Roman culture that continues perpetually throughout their history for a very long period of time. It very much hints at their ancient monarchy, and the chariot is a symbol of old. In later Byzantine history, the chariot will regain some prominence, but right now, in this area, the chariot it's old news. It's very old. It was what the Celtic peoples came storming in on back when they were truly in the Ugga days, when they were conquering and moving into the area. But, so the chariot, in the Roman days, it was only ever really used for style and tradition, because it's very outdated. It doesn't work well in the city. Just really not a Roman thing anymore. Anyways, let me think. Any touch up we need to do for the king's period, for the kingdom. All the religious facilities will continue now independently. The Senate, of course, we know about the Senate. They'll become the power behind Rome. Rome is a class-based society. As we mentioned, they were originally pretty blood originated. But now, like 12, 15 generations have passed since our story began. And the Romans have very much established an ethnic hierarchy. While the doors to society were open when the society truly began, culturally, once everybody was boiled into the pot, they were divided into the bottom as the plebs. They are just the landless masses. They don't really have anything. They live off their paychecks on a day-to-day basis or off their patrons. We'll discuss the patron system later. So the plebs at the bottom, they're poor people. They can have a little bit, but they don't have much. Above them, you have your equites, or is it the principes? So you have a free class. They have housing, and some of them, especially if they were of a military background, might have even owned a small plot of land. But so there is a middle class, depending on the time period. It can be large or small. Right now, it's very large. But you have your free class, and above them, your free landowning class, who's almost certainly your military peoples. If you're a poor person who owns land, you or your ancestors served in the military, because land was treated as a pension later in Roman history. I don't know if it was now. But anyways, landed nobility, they're the source of all military at this point. So yes, we have lots of these free peoples. So know once again that these details will change the history. I'll do my best to cover when they change. So above these guys, we have our business-owning nobles. At this point in Roman history, all wealth is hoarded in the upper class. They have... Then honestly, they'll gain more. But the pie's pretty small. They have most of the pie. But, yeah, the nobles will always have a whole lot. They're the only people who don't really own any slaves. And as the wars are fought, more and more slaves will be gained. And the wars are fought by the citizens, but the citizens will be demoted to freemen or plebs because of the new bottom class, the slaves, the non-Roman slaves. The plebs are free, but they don't have much. A slave could, under many circumstances, expect to get more than a pleb, but they're also subject to abuse and no rights and all sorts of other nasty things. It's really a luck of the draw when you're a slave, because you might even have in the Roman societies had room for freedom. Slavery was ethnically driven in a lot of cases initially, much like American slavery was. Well, I won't open that bag. Not today, anyways. So, basically, you're conquered as an enemy of Rome if your city is taken by storm, or if you're in the enemy army, or if you're unlucky enough to be taken by pirates, or if you're in debt, or they didn't care. The Romans were equal opportunity enslavers. Roman plebs could become slaves. They're a little more likely to free you if you're Roman, but they're no less likely to enslave you. And, yep, very archaic society. Lots of concepts that don't jive very well with the modern day, but this is where our society comes from, so. Though know that in later Roman society will become very popular for rich people to release all their slaves upon their death. So don't think as much the old chattel slavery of the American South, because especially in the American South, they were, because of how ethnically based it was, they weren't very likely to free their slaves. But in this time, it was not that common, but let's just say at least 1 in 100, minimum 1 in 100 would become free. Honestly, it could be a lot higher. I've heard some people say that as far as if you're a slave for 30 years under the right master, you could expect to be free. I don't know how realistic that is. But I'd say at least 1 in 100. I could possibly put it up to 1 in 10 would likely get their freedom. If you believe some of the sources, more like 1 in 3 per generation could expect to get their freedom under the right masters. It's best to be known that it is far better to be a city slave than a country slave. I'm trying to think of who said this, but somebody said that it was the publicness of being in the city which gave the better treatment to the slaves in cities, because you wouldn't want to be seen as abusing your property in public. Though, mind you, slaves, unless they tried to run away or something, would not be treated again like the American South, because slaves are expensive. You know, you would not want one to die on you, so you wouldn't be using and abusing them. Once again, you don't think they're so much less than human. You do think they're less than you, though. Now we'll talk about barbarian, where that word comes from. The concept is initially Greek. It comes from the word barbaros, which means bar. Know that what we're discussing is initially the source of most racism. It'll evolve and take many different forms through history. This is the core origin of xenophobia in the modern day, though it will take many different forms right now.